Hello and welcome to Something Different with John and Sarah, where this week the something different is the weather. Hello and welcome back to Something Different with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending let me check the date, 26th of June 2026. This week, you may notice if you're watching this on video streaming, on podcast or on YouTube, I'm not actually at home. So if there are any issues with my sound or my video, I apologize to the listeners, but hopefully it'll work just fine. We've got a packed show for you this week. We've obviously got the weather. We've got some Green Party reaction to the weather. We've got some state funding of the media. We've got some headlines that are fundamentally misleading. We've got lots of other stuff. We've got a solicitor's strike going on that's been affecting Sarah. And we have got, let me see, what was I going to talk about? We've got a really interesting question on the Leaving Cert paper that we wanted to discuss. But before we do any of that, it is customary for me, not always for her, to ask my co-host how she is.
I'll never live that down. I'm fine. I'm pretty hot. The courts are an unforgiving hot box. Put it that way.
Yes, well, everywhere is at the moment. I am not. I am not on the island. I am a top secret location overseas, where the weather I've been experiencing the European heat wave at its most oppressive. Let me tell you, and it's one of those times. I've been to the pub a fair bit over the last couple of days, and you know when it's so hot that you start drinking the pints almost like they're water, and it's also so hot that the pints don't really have an effect on you. So you're
Oh no,
you're
they
sitting.
do. They do.
There.
They do.
Okay, well, that's my story, and I am sticking to it. Anyway, how have you been coping in the heat?
I don't mind. I don't really get it. I think people respond differently to the heat, and I'm pretty okay, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not. I melt. So, like I say, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're looking at me wiping my brow. I just melt. I'm one of those people. I always sweat from the forehead. Actually, like the armpits are never too bad or anything like that, but it always just comes from the forehead. I like to say it's because, they wants to keeps the brain particularly cool, but who knows? Look at you rolling your eyes. Anyway, enough chit chat. The Green Party, I saw Kieran Cuff put out a tweet this week basically saying that this latest heat wave is yet more evidence that we are failing on the issue of climate change. To which all I can say, Sarah, is these are the same people who are complaining about the heat, but are fundamentally ideologically opposed to instituting air conditioning. Now, if I didn't have air conditioning in the hotel I'm in this week, I think I might actually be dead.
Well, you know. I was going to say something hilariously mean there, but I won't. Of course, they're against air conditioning. They're against everything. Their most happy moment was lockdown, when we actually got the true utopia that they want, which is no flights, no cars, nobody going anywhere, everybody in their house. And that's ultimately what they want. They want to regress society back to, trad wife times, where you're churning your own butter and, living off local produce. And that's lovely and everything, but it's not realistic. They're not just against air conditioning, John. They're against everything.
Well, it's like the way they're against nuclear power. Our friend Keith Mills, our sometimes friend of the podcast, sometimes abject foe of the podcast, Keith Mills, had a hit tweet this week where he pointed out that basically, like every week or so, China produces all the emissions in 1 week that Ireland has produced in 100 years of its independence. And this conversation about climate comes up every time. I mean, if you have anomalous weather of any kind at all, they will say it's climate change. There's snow, it's climate change. If it's windy, it's climate change. If it's sun, it's climate change. And that is why, I mean, just as I like to think of myself, Sarah, as a rational person. And when everything that the weather does confirms your theory and nothing disproves it, I get really, really skeptical. If you're telling me that because it's really hot in June, the climate must be changing, or because it's really wet in June, the climate must be changing, or because we've had a summer storm in June, the climate must be changing. Like, I get really, really, really skeptical. And as you say, if you go back to the Green Party, you go back to lockdown, and you go back to their solutions, every time the weather is and the media are terrible for this as well. The media, because I think they need to fill inches in print. Anytime there's any kind of weather that is what I'd say conversational weather, the way, like, sometimes there's weather where you don't talk about it, but then the weather is so bad or so good that it's the first thing you mention to almost anybody you meet. anytime we get what I call conversational weather, the media immediately turns the entire conversation back around to climate change and we're all going to die and we all have to give up everything. But we cannot get air conditioning. And I think that is bizarre because if you're going to have a conversation about climate change and let's say they're right and it's going to keep getting hotter and hotter and hotter and old people across Europe are going to keep dying and dying and dying, well, you've two ways to address that. One of which is, of course, to switch off the entire continent in the hope that you get better and the weather decides to forgive us. Or B is to actually just let people put air conditioning units into their houses and new apartments so that people have somewhere to retreat from the weather. I was talking to one of my colleagues in Germany for a statement, Elizabeth, and she was saying that in Germany, in many places, like the government has actually gone around ripping air conditioning units out of people's houses because they don't comply with environmental regulations because they emit greenhouse gases. But in actual fact, those aircon units are saving people from the very thing that the government says it's trying to prevent.
Yeah, but they would say that that's still, they're treating an aircon unit as if it's the same as a petrol car or whatever as cause of the problem. But I think you're right, but at the same time, if to play devil's advocate, the way they would see it is that air conditioning is just one of many things that we're doing to destroy the planet, and it should be destroyed. But it doesn't. It's not in line with the reality.
Yeah, but this is the debate you don't hear on the Irish media, though, which is like, okay, so we know, and if you're listening to this podcast for a long time, you will know that the position with RTE, for example, is that you are not allowed on the airwaves of RTE if you take any position contrary to climate change. So if you're like Bjorn Lomborg, who's one of the world's most famous climate skeptic scientists, who says basically climate science has been exaggerated for years. The problem is not nearly as bad as the climate scientists say. You're actually not allowed on RTE. The only interpretation that RTE will ever permit you to have on their airwaves is somebody who says climate change is real, it's happening, and it's a massive problem. Okay, stipulate that. But they take it to the next level, and this isn't official policy. This is just the way the Irish media operate, whereby not only are you not allowed to say maybe climate change isn't as bad as we thought, you're also not allowed to say, okay, climate change is bad and therefore we should do the following things to mitigate it: install air conditioning, build nuclear power plants. If there's going to be higher sea levels, build seawalls around low-lying areas. The only thing that they will permit you on the airwaves to talk about is how we've got to get people out of their cars and onto electric buses, and everyone knows that a plastic bag, you have to switch all your lights off at like 6 o'clock in the evening or you're a monster. And by the way, I'm not exaggerating that. That's the whole premise of Earth Day, that kind of was in vogue about 5 or 6 years ago and has kind of dropped out now.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm allergic to the Green Party in general, and always have been. I think long-time listeners of this podcast would agree
Aye.
with that.
Yeah, but it's
But
not just them. It's not
but
just
it's
them. I mean,
no,
their
no,
ideology. One of the
no.
things,
So
one of
that,
the reasons they've been so successful is that everyone else has adopted their ideology wholesale.
but also loads of things are just accepted as the premise is still a question. Most people like climate can also change. There's lots of people who, like it's all of the language. It's like loads of things. The language is so toxic and it's so biased. Climate change deniers. There's loads of people who are skeptical about the way we manage this that don't
Hmm.
deny the climate is changing. Like the climate, like establishing that the climate is changing is not the winning argument that people think it is. Climate has changed before human beings were on Earth. Do you know what I mean? And I think, and I've always thought that the answer to some of this is actually going to be in innovation. It's not going to be in ruining people's lives and making old grannies freeze to death or boil to death. That's not going to be realistic, and that the innovation will be the thing that actually solves this problem. But there's
But
always these, like as you say, like you're not allowed onto RTE, but that you have to accept the premise of everything. You have to accept the premise. Well, the climate is changing, and that means we're right. So that means that anybody who says anything after that is suddenly a climate change denier. And climate change denier is kind of this really negative um, expression that that's I think deliberately linked with Holocaust denier. That it makes you the baddie in the story. You look like a lunatic, unrealistic, horrible, terrible, immoral person, and everybody else who's arguing with you is therefore, even at the beginning of the argument or the debate, is automatically the goodies and you're the baddies. And that I have a huge issue with.
yeah, No, and that's the way but that's the way the left frame every issue, right? You're
Mm.
either, I mean, it's the same on immigration. You are either with us or you're a racist or far right. It's the same on crime. It's the same on poverty in the economy. If you don't support ever increasing the welfare bill, well, then you're some kind of anti-poor person who wants to condemn children to a life of starvation. It's always with the left. It's always moral absolutes. They are right and everyone else is a monster. You're not just wrong. You're a monster. Your motives are bad. You're all of that. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that dominates the conversation in Ireland is that framing. But I wanted to move the conversation on because I heard a little bit this week that there's been a little bit more chat back home about the old data centers, because there was a report, I think, that showed that data centers are now consuming some huge percentage of Irish electricity. I think it's over 20% of all electricity is going to the data centers. And of course, the data centers are kind of the anti-climate because they're consuming loads of water, they're consuming loads of power. They don't employ people directly. They're not a whole lot of people working in data centers. They're just big banks of computers that need constant cooling. What do you make of this kind of anti-data center movement that there is in the country, or are you in my camp, which is this is investment into the country? We're actually geographically well located for it, and we should welcome the money, and we should, just build a nuclear power plant and make money.
I think I just fall down somewhere in between. I mean, I think there's no doubt about it that data centers take up use a huge amount of energy. But again, people can go on and on to things and talk about data centers and they're terrible and they're this or whatever. But they're the ones up at 3 o'clock in the morning Googling or asking AI whether or not their ex-boyfriend is a narcissist. Like, do you know what I mean? You're using that data. You're living your life by that data. All of this is part of your day-to-day life. And it's just a bit sort of like our economy has been based on things for years and years and years, including foreign investment, different things, all of the tech companies coming to Ireland, pharmaceuticals coming to Ireland for tax issues and all of that. And I see data centers as an extension of some of the potential for us as an economy. But I don't disagree that they use a lot of energy. I just think, again, it's not an honest conversation that's being had. It's people going onto debate programs and pretending like they're not using their phone or they're not contributing to the need for data centers.
Yeah.
And then acting as if only bad people are putting data centers here. And like, I don't understand why that might be. Well, it's you, hon, on AI.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody this week who's kind of like not an expert in AI, but follows the area very closely. Now, I haven't verified this fact, but I trust the person said to me, who said that 100-word email crafted by Claude or ChatGPT or Grok or any of the AI platforms, if you just ask it to do that, craft 100-word email, thanking somebody for an invitation to a birthday party or replying to a job application, whatever. Why you would do that, first of all, I really don't know. I mean, write your own email. But if you do, it apparently consumes 2.5 liters of water in cooling. That's what it needs to just keep the super servers cool for the amount of processing power you're using. So it's an immensely water intensive, power intensive thing. But it's also, I mean, we cannot say we're going to benefit from the AI transition and then would we put the data center somewhere else? I mean, this is a temperate, cool part of the world with a lot of qualified tech people. I think we should be
Yeah.
open to this. It's a unique selling point. It's the same as like the way the farmers say this is one of the best places in the world to feed cattle for milk, and they're completely correct. It's also one of the best places in the world, aside from Greenland or Iceland or the Arctic, to put data centers. So why wouldn't we do it? Is my view.
But again, uh, have the debate, but have honest debate. Have two smart people who know what they're talking about, thrashing it out about whether or not it's economically, environmentally, etc., safe for Ireland to be the home of loads of data centers, and what the cost to the planet and the climate and the environment and everything would be. It's just we're so immature about the way we talk about hard things that we always for anybody, as you say, to get onto the telly to talk about anything or debate anything, they have to accept 5 or 6 accepted truths. And I think that the real smart debate comes from starting at zero and accepting no truths and having two clever people figure out what's what.
Well, I want to talk about an episode on the telly this week, but before I do, just a couple of housekeeping matters. First of all, Lots of you have been in touch with me directly, or some of you in the comments asking why on this podcast we have not covered the Parnell Street stabbing trial, which is ongoing. And the simple reason is that the trial is ongoing. And Sarah and I were talking before this podcast, and we think that when the verdict comes out, whenever that may be, whatever the verdict may be, we'll probably record an emergency episode on that. The second bit of housekeeping is, of course, my weekly appeal for you to subscribe to our channels, whether that be on Spotify, on Apple, or on YouTube, which is the three places at the moment you can reliably get this podcast. We hope to expand that in the next few weeks. We are delighted with the number of you already have. We're delighted with the number of people who are tuning in, and we're glad you're enjoying the content. So if you are enjoying the content, please make sure other people can find it by doing the liking, the subscribing, the sharing, and all that kind of boring stuff. So thank you very much for that. But anyway, speaking of people going on television and gatekeepers, did you see this week, did you see Thomas Byrne going up against Niamh Ní Bhríon?
No, but you're going to tell me about it.
So first of all, just because people who are viewers of this podcast will know that for many years I worked with a woman called Niamh Ní Bhríon. This is an entirely different person. This is a woman called Niamh Ní Bhríon who works for the Transnational Institute, which is an enormously well-funded, very left-wing think tank that is funded by various European governments, including, I think, the Irish government and definitely the Dutch government, basically to have a go at everybody. And so she was on there, and she was basically saying, first of all, that like she was having a go at the government over neutrality. And she basically said, if there were Russian ships in Irish waters, like, it'll be terrible for us to intervene and all the rest of it. Then she was basically saying that, like, when the head of NATO comes here as part of the Irish EU presidency, he should be arrested for war crimes, and he should be detained because, she said, he was responsible for the genocide in Gaza. Now, I'm not actually going to make a point about Gaza here. Whatever your view on Gaza is your view. But I don't know under what law you could possibly conceivably arrest the head of NATO for coming here when NATO does many things, but Israeli policymaking is not one of them. But what I just thought was funny about the whole thing was, first of all, this is the level of debate that they're putting on Virgin Media now. It's literally poor old Thomas Byrne, grand fella, hail fella, well met. I don't think he believes in many things beyond, the European Union, and Thomas Byrne should be in government. And that's fair enough. And he's there trying to defend against this like crazy person who's advocating that the government do utterly crazy things like arrest international dignitaries when they arrive here. And I'm just sitting here, and I wish somebody had turned to Thomas and kind of gone, Thomas, why are you funding her? Why are you funding this person who's saying all these crazy things? And why are you funding this media outlet that's putting the crazy person on television to say the crazy things? And why is it that the level of debate on television has become so divorced from what normal people actually think about these things? Because I don't think normal people, if you took a ballot of Irish people, I'd be fairly confident that you get about a 90-10 result against arresting a NATO official who landed in Dublin Airport. Do you think I'm wrong?
But no, but it's also the that, do you ever see that? I think we've discussed before, there's this graph that's like the crazy hot scale, that women, whatever. Anyway, it's like there's
relentlessly accurate in my view, by the way.
It's like you're allowed to be crazy in certain domains, but you're not. You're allowed to be a 9 out of 10 crazy in what you're saying if it's in a certain category of debate. But you're not even allowed to be a 1% crazy in, for example, vaccines, a response to COVID, the COVID aftermath. You're not even allowed to be even 1% off script on that. You just won't even be allowed on the telly. You won't even be allowed to talk about it or whatever. You're not allowed to be 10%, 5% crazy on trans issues or anything like that. But you're allowed to be 90% crazy if it's anti-Israel, anti-NATO, anything like that. You're allowed go for it. You are allowed go wild because you have carte blanche to say whatever you want if you're the right kind of crazy. I mean,
I will never forget.
Of course, going on the TV and saying stuff like that. And by the way, once again, relatively unchecked, John, relatively unchallenged.
Well, look, I have experience.
And we know, and we're long enough now in the tooth watching political things that people who go on to that show, yourself included, and other political debates, political shows over the years, if they're even 0.05% crazy in one of the other domains, not only do they not get unchallenged, they practically get heckled by the presenters.
Well, I know, but like I have some experience. You talk about the conspiracy stuff. I have some experience of this because older listeners may remember the 2008 Lisbon referendum in Ireland. And they may remember that at the time I was working with my very good friend Declan Ganley, and I'm not saying I was working with him, I was working for him because he should take the credit for this, in the Libertas campaign that was kind of integral to defeating that referendum the first time around. And you may remember, Sarah, some of the conspiracy theories that were spouted about Declan. Like, we had actual serious Irish politicians and journalists, like serious, credible people, TDs, columnists, speculating that Declan Ganley was funded by the CIA.
Oh,
And that,
I still hear that. People
yeah,
still believe that.
that the American intelligence agencies were interfering in little old Ireland. I mean, if you turn around some of the crazy stuff you can say in Ireland, if you are direct, as you say, if you are crazy in the right direction, it is not an issue at all.
Yeah.
You can be the crazy nut who goes on arguing that the Irish government should unilaterally arrest international figures if they happen to land here, and Shane Coleman will nod sagely and kind of maybe raise a procedural concern. But if you go on television and kind of go, maybe we should do some more screening of foreign criminals before they arrive here. Well, then you're beyond the pale racist nut job. Like, it's the intellectual environment in which all of this takes place is so warped
Yeah.
that I don't think the ordinary Irish person truly appreciates how warped it is, and I don't think they would recognize it or feel comfortable inside it themselves. And I mention all this, of course, because Nick Delahanty, friend of the podcast, this week released an enormous database of all the money that the government are giving these media outlets, which is, I think Nick calculated like 80 million. Now, some of that's going on production and, Fair City and what have you, but a huge whack if it's going to news.
Mm. And the producers who self-select who these people are, who's allowed on, who's not allowed on, more importantly. And look, I think that people don't know, but I think that people are waking up a bit. But the person or the people who suffer in the dumbing down of every single debate we have about every single topic that's important is the public.
Yeah. But also, like, for a while on this podcast, in all of its iterations, we have talked about kind of like how the people in charge of the, policing disinformation sometimes publish it. And like, if you went into every example of that, you'd go insane. But there was this example this week that I just can't get past. So I'm referring now to a story by the Irish Examiner on June 23rd, which was, I think that was Tuesday of this week. And it was a report they did on a survey of Irish parents. And so basically, parents were surveyed and they were asked, I think it was 21,500 households with children. They were asked by the Department of Education whether they wanted to move to a multi-denominational educational model or whether they wanted to stay and keep their Catholic or their Protestant or whatever it is, denominational diocesan national school. That was the question. And the result was basically 58% of people said, we want to keep the system the way it is. We like our local schools. Thank you very much. And 42% said, no, actually, it's time to get the church out of schools. We'd like more kind of educate togethers or what have you. That's basically the result, 58-42. So I'll read you the Irish Examiner's headline. It says, landmark survey shows strong preference for change to multi-denominational primary schools, as in a change to multi-denominational. And that is what they lead with. They lead with the fact that the first paragraph reads, a significant portion of families who intend to send their child to a religious-run primary school have told a landmark survey that they would prefer to be multi-denominational. And so they lead with the 42%, even though it's the clear minority. And they basically present the 42% as momentum for change, even though 58% of people in the survey have said, we want to keep our schools. Like, that is not, like, if that is not misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda, what the fuck is it? Like, what's the definition? If you're presenting, you're literally saying black is white in terms of how you're presenting the results to the public. How is that not misinformation? Like, is my head exploding here?
No, it is. It is. But like, it's so predictable, and it is a complete blatant agenda. If the reverse had happened, they would have written the same. They would have written the same headline.
Yeah.
But that's what you're up against on.
Well,
And
they
it's
would have
really
changed it to
disingenuous,
majority. They would have changed it to majority if the result. But like,
they
other
would
than
have
that,
changed it to
not
majority.
one word in the story would have had to change.
But I don't know. I mean, what can you say to that? If you're a journalist and that's what you're doing, have a word with yourself. Like when you
Yeah,
went,
but you know what?
When you went to college and you studied journalism and you thought about yourself, I presume, I didn't plan to be a journalist at any time, but I presume if you're an ideological, cool or naive 16, 17-year-old who wants to do journalism, you have these aspirations, you've seen the movies, you want to be the one who cracks the story, you want to be the one who serves the public by exposing things or whatever. If you're writing that kind of shite and reframing things to suit a narrative or whatever, like Scarlet for you, you're going to look
Yeah.
back in the future and realize that all the stuff, and it's always the way that these people have no self-awareness about the fact that they sneer and talk about old Ireland and how there was an agenda and the government and the Catholic Church or whatever. And they're it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, fuck it, I'm going to say it. Because I had a few points earlier on, and maybe I shouldn't say it, and like maybe you'll tell me to delete this later on because it's defamatory. But I don't think I'm going to defame him
I'm
because
scared.
because I don't want to. I don't actually want to defame him because there's nothing wrong with him. But like, I have watched for years and years and years as Mick Clifford in the Irish Examiner lectures the rest of us. Mick does this thing. He has this act, what I called is the grizzled, cynical old hack act, where he's an ara, grandeur, hail fella, well met. I'll go on television, and I'll affect a slightly kind of like weary disposition with the world and all these crazy right wing people who don't know how it all works. And he's a liberal, and that's absolutely fine. But the talking down that when I was at Gript, the talking down he did to us over like our journalism and like why it wasn't, up to his standards. Mick, your publication is publishing the inverse of the truth and is doing so openly and blatantly. You're just going to sit there and say absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing are you going to say about it? Are you going to raise it internally in a meeting? Are you going to go, this is a disgrace, we should publish a correction? I don't think you are, but prove me wrong. Because I am sick. It's not that these people, people have a right to publish whatever they want. But what I am sick of is the moral righteousness with which they do it. And for me, and there's a couple of people in this category. I mean, Matt Cooper is another one, right? But Mick Clifford is one of the country's most pernicious purveyors of that kind of moral righteousness, particularly when it comes to journalism and standards and fake news and all that kind of stuff. You write for this paper, like fix the problem, and then people might take you seriously. But like, he's not going to do it.
And these are the people who write articles about Donald Trump saying fake news. And I mean, they are fake news. That's fake news. Writing an article that the headline is the inverse of the fact is fake news.
Well, let's stay on the media because our old pal, our old mucker, our old friend Ben had another run in this week with People Before Profit, where they refused to answer his questions. You want to take this one?
I mean, just again, it's just all a bit embarrassing, isn't it? We don't accept questions from Grip, and then just like whispering to each other like two teenagers, Paul Murphy and Richard Boyd Barrett, and then I think their press officer or something off camera just being like, "We've already said we don't take questions from Grip." I'm just mortified for you. And then the Irish Times asking the same question 30 seconds later. It's kind of like giving vibes of, really childish teenage girls who are like ignoring each other and they're like, I'm not answering. I'm going to answer somebody else, but not you. You know what I mean? Like, grow up.
Tell Maria that
Yeah.
I say she's bad. Yeah, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah. Tell Grip they're too scary and mean and we don't like them. So we're not going to answer questions. And also, more importantly, somewhere along the line, sweetheart, you have lost complete a grasp of the reality of your situation, which you're an elected representative who's there to represent all of the constituency of, in this case, John Leary, not just the people who voted for you. And some of those people might be grift readers, and some of those people deserve an answer from the person who's paid out of taxpayers' money to represent them. But far be it from me to school such intellectual powerhouses as Paul Murphy and Richard Boyd Barrett on the way the doll works.
Look, I am not at Gript anymore, as people know, and therefore I can say things now that I couldn't say when I was at Gript. Because when I was at Gript and I was the editor, of course, I had to stand up for Ben, didn't I? And I had to say, this is a disgrace. It's terrible, like the way our journalist has been treated. And don't get me wrong, it is.
There it is.
But I was also absolutely delighted when that stuff would happen. Because, like, if they wanted, if those two Egypts wanted to, like, send a rocket up Ben and make him more popular than he ever has been, or if they wanted to, like, convince people to give money to the people running Gript, they couldn't do
Yeah.
anything better than what they've done. I mean, it's just like, in an environment where people are looking for, I mean, this podcast is called Something Different. People are looking for something different. The best way that you can demonstrate to the world that something different is something different, in this case, Gript, is by treating them differently. I mean, if you are Paul Murphy and Richard Boyd Barrett, and you are warriors against capitalism and want to overthrow the system, and want to institute revolution, but the only people you'll take questions for are the government-funded
I know.
press,
I know.
you are basically pointing at Ben and saying Ben is something different,
Hmm.
which is, I say this with love for Ben, maybe more praise than Ben deserves, because Ben is just a regular journalist trying to do his job. His question wasn't beyond the pale, which is why the Irish. I mean, if Ben had asked a really beyond the pale question, do you think the Irish Times would have asked it for him in the next moment? Of course they wouldn't. Because why would they? If he'd gone in there and said, why can't we deport all black people? I don't think another journalist would have asked that question, because that genuinely would have been a racist question.
But he's not. But he's not. He's just asking a general question. They
That's
just
my
think
point.
they get to decide. But they think it's a sort of an entitled arrogance, and the long there's been a long deterioration of the media, and there's been a long sort of cementing of the relationship between, in my opinion, members of Leinster House and the media, which is that there's a kind of a cozy cohort there. And they've become, it's not just that they feel like, Gript is far right and they don't take questions or whatever. It's that they don't really like, and you see it in other and other politicians, the kind of irritation in the face of being they're not really used to being asked hard questions anymore.
Well, it's the problem of the bubble. You're talking about a bubble problem there,
Yeah.
where, you know, the journalists don't really meet real people. They just meet politicians. And the politicians don't really meet real people. They just meet journalists and civil servants. And so they convince each other of things that aren't true. And I think back to, like, the kind of surprise that they had. I mean, I was talking about the grizzled old hacks when I was having a go with Clifford a few minutes ago. And if you think back to those, I don't want to harp on about them, because they've kind of taken on mythical status that they don't deserve on the right. Those referendums in 2024 where the government lost on the mothers in the homes and the whatever it was,
It's
relationships.
mythical. Not mythical. It was just deadly.
Yeah, well, it was pretty fun. Yeah, but the kind of conventional wisdom in Leinster House a week before that vote was, it's going to pass, right? And all the grizzled old hacks thought it was going to pass, because the grizzled old hacks were talking to the grizzled old politicians who were talking to the
Yeah.
grizzled old hacks. And that thing that happens happens in Westminster as well. I guess it happens in Washington. Definitely happens in Dublin, where the conventional wisdom circle starts to congeal. And, like, what happens is that the Bobby tells Jim that he heard from Paddy that this is going to happen. And then Jim goes on and tells Bobby that he heard it from and basically three people start telling each other the same thing, because the third person has told them. And the
Yeah.
conventional wisdom really congeals really fast. And that's what's happening in that explains a lot of kind of the attitudes of the Dublin elite class, is that they're all talking to each other all the time, telling each other that they're right, and they get convinced. And then I will never forget, I should say, Leo Varadkar's shock on his face when he came into Dublin Castle. Do you remember when he had to accept that the referendums had been beaten, but well beaten? He didn't
Yeah.
last another couple of weeks after that, if I remember correctly.
Shook. Maria Steen was there. He had to go home. He had to go home. Like,
Yeah.
but also, I mean, they are so cosseted by the media and so in their bubble, as you say, or whatever, and they think everybody who disagrees with them is kind of evil and wrong and terrible. And they just you've said it before. Your ability to be smart debater, question answerer, panelist on a TV show diminishes and diminishes and diminishes with every single one of those TV shows or questions where people before profit don't have to answer questions they don't like, or you know, um, Thomas Byrne or whoever is sitting there not really being challenged or not expected to challenge something. They just get worse and worse and worse at what they're supposed to do. And that's why when somebody like you or somebody else or somebody that, I mean, they don't let people on very often, but when somebody somehow gets through the net by accident, they just clean up, because these people are just so cosseted they don't know how to debate anymore.
Yeah. All right, we move on a little bit. I wanted to ask you briefly, because we said we discuss it briefly, but we won't spend much time on it. Sir Jeffrey Donaldson. What do you think?
Ugh. I mean, have we not just had our fill of just weirdos in the last couple of weeks? I actually didn't, because of the story that we discussed last week, which I won't go back over. Do you not just feel in your soul just a bit weary of creeps?
Look, there's so much of it. I mean, there's another horror case involving parents and a child in the UK. Straight couple this time, parents and a child in the UK. There's just been so much of it. I suppose that it's better probably to focus with the Donaldson thing on the political ramifications, because like I'm not ashamed to say I like a lot of people. One thing about Donaldson was, in his pomp, he was always me. What really annoys me after things like this happen is I read a series of articles by Suzanne Breen in the Irish Independent this week, and it's the journalists who kind of like start acting like they always knew.
I know.
They always knew there was something a bit off with him, and everything he did ever in his past is kind of recast as evidence of the filthy pervert that he always was. And like, they act like they're telling you something that they knew for years when they hadn't a clue any more than anybody else had. And one of the things about Donaldson is that he was big on his outreach to the Republic. So when I was in college, he must have been at every college debating society in Dublin at least once a year. He was always down south. He was always coming to talk to groups of young people. He was big on outreach. So I got to know him a little bit. We weren't friends, we're not anything like that. But like, he was a very good communicator and a very influential person in unionism. And I just think if you look at the history of Northern Unionism now over the last couple of decades, so you've Peter Robinson with what happened to his wife, happened with his wife Iris, where there was like a sex scandal and a corruption scandal. You've Arlene Foster with a massive scandal over the cash for ash thing. Then you've Edwin Poots, who becomes leader, who lasts about 30 days because he's just hopeless in the job. And now you've done like Northern Irish Unionism has just lurched from crisis to crisis over the last 20 years. It's extraordinary. And achieved very little for it. And this is just the latest disaster that just makes me wonder, like, is it not just time to pack the DUP up if you're of that persuasion and hope that something else emerges? Because this surely can't continue. I mean, Donaldson was their best communicator, and it turns out he's a perv all along.
Well, I'm not sure you pack anything up. There's always other people there. But it is kind of worrisome and depressing that that's the trajectory of the GP. I mean, again, you want smart people, but to your point, I'm allergic to that thing you're talking about, which is that people suddenly act as if, well, first of all, they reframe everything from
Yeah.
before. And like now every opinion he ever had is wrong. And like, because he was a baddie. But also people, in my obviously pretty limited experience, but people who are sexually abusing people or predatory or whatever, they grow up in this society and they know that the public think they know what the public think about people who do that. So they develop an ability to hide in plain sight. And the idea that people always have this idea that criminal courts are full of families of victims, people who knew the person who never, ever, ever, ever would have suspected. Don't be so naive. You can't tell that somebody's a weirdo or a pervert most of the time. And they hide in plain sight and they've trained themselves to hide from you because they know that society thinks they're scum. So
Yeah.
I totally take your point that people will be like, I knew it was weird. No, you didn't.
Yeah.
You didn't like him.
Yeah.
Fine. But you didn't know he was weird.
Yeah, it's the settling of old scores. Now, I don't want to sound like Jeffrey Donaldson has been convicted of a heinous crime and will spend many, many years in prison. And like what's happened to him in many ways is worse than death. If you're somebody in his position, where like all politicians, all people in the media, me, Sarah, everybody has some degree of an ego where like your public reaction is important to you. And he has suffered a degree of social death that is deeply just, and I think will be almost as painful for him as execution. But the way people go on as if, first of all, there's score settling. And second of all, there's like, as I said, we always knew. I met Jeffrey Donaldson literally dozens of occasions. I would have named 70 or 80 people before I ever got to him on the list of people who might potentially be
Mm.
engaged in abuse. Like it's so some of the score, some of the kind of like the hinting of kind of like, it was always a bit dodgy. No, it's
Well, like
annoying.
but he's been found guilty and he's going to jail, and rightly so. And like, good, good, good luck in prison, Jeffrey. And that's absolutely appropriate and right, and that's what he deserves. It's just that sometimes people's sanctimonious shite after things like that is just a bit unbearable.
Yeah. And it's always in particular newspapers as well. I don't care. The Independent are bad for that. They are bad for that. After every criminal trial, the accused is always portrayed, or the convicted person is always portrayed as an absolute monster, and it's unbelievable people couldn't see it. No, people couldn't see it because, as you say, they hide. All right, let's move on, because there was a topic I wanted to talk about, because I got a lot of both pushback and support for a tweet I sent this week. It was actually David Quinn's tweet, where he pointed out that there was this question this week on the Irish Leaving Cert Politics and Society exam. And the question that 18-year-old kids, mostly 18, some 17, maybe the odd 19-year-old, but people doing their Leaving Cert were asked was question E: describe two ways we see patriarchy in the world today. Now, I got in a little bit of trouble because I said basically that, a kid who writes down their answer on that, who kind of thinks, well, I don't really see patriarchy, I think we live in a pretty equal society, is going to lose marks and potentially getting into college or the course they
No,
want in
but
college because of their
John,
political opinion.
they'll say, if you made your argument well, we'll still grade it the same. That's what they'll say. But who is going to take that risk when they're in the most important exam potentially of their life?
You see, it's
Nobody.
easy to say. It's easy to say because, I mean, obviously there's a bit of me. I was thinking about this. I was thinking, like, if I was sitting that exam, what would I say? And I think I'd probably write something like, patriarchy is a feminist construct which has been invented to justify the recent repression of men in many cases.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily believe that. I think I would have written that down,
Yeah.
and then with some supporting argument, and then I would have
And then
basically
you would have
said,
gotten a D minus, and the person whose extra project on the vagina monologues through interpretive dance would have gotten an A plus.
yeah, but you see, then what I would have done is I exercise my right. No, no. By the way, I wouldn't have done any of this because I would be 18 sitting the Leaving Cert, and of course, you're right. No sane person would do that. But I was thinking, like, if I was doing it now, I would probably, like, put in the paper, wait for them to give me the mark, and then have the right to look at your script and basically dispute the mark and cause a big stink about it.
But
Like
that's
that.
because we're in our 40s and we're confident now. And like I would think I would feel very strongly about that. Again, going back to my point earlier on, that it's making it's there's a presumption of fact in the question.
Well, there's a presumption.
There's
Yeah, yeah.
there's a presumption of fact in the question, which is that we live in a patriarchal society that has loads of examples of that. Just give me two, it'll be easy. And I dispute that. But when I was 17 sitting the Leaving Cert, I would have not. I would have been like, yeah, whatever you want. What do I think the examiner wants to hear? Because that's what 17-year-olds do.
Mm.
Most of them, in fairness. I don't want to be, there's definitely some much more confident than me 17-year-olds out there who probably do have the strength to say stuff like that. But it's just, again, why does that have to be in there at all? Because you're imposing your politics onto 17-year-olds. It's not necessary for that question to be in the exam. Pick something else.
Well, it's also, you have to bear in mind, it's not just the exam question. If you're listening to this and you're kind of going, why are John and Sarah going on about some question that was in the exam? It's also the exam question reflects the course, right? So it's also a reflection of what kids are being taught in school. So your kids, if you've got sons, or indeed if you've got daughters and you care about this stuff, but particularly if you've got sons, they're going into schools, state schools, where the curriculum is telling them and their teachers are teaching them that they live in a society run by men and that this is a bad thing and that the patriarchal structures must be dismantled. Like,
Mm.
your kids in secondary school are being taught an extreme version of feminist critical theory that is not widely academically accepted, that does not have universal consent, that no electorate in the world has ever ratified, and your kids are being taught it as fact. And okay, you can say, well, fair enough, it's just a political theory. What does that matter? It matters because your sons are being taught essentially that they're part of the problem. You've got a 16, 17-year-old kid who's going into school who's being taught that because of the the genitalia he was born with and the gametes he was born with, that he's part of a problem in society. I don't think that's the role of schools. I don't think it's the role of education. I think it's a fucking disgrace. I think that we accept it so passively. I mean, the existence of patriarchy is not an academic discussion, it's a political discussion. It's one to be resolved during voting. By the way, every man and every woman over the age of 18 has a vote. We can democratically decide these things. We do not need academics trying to declare that big political questions have been resolved when they haven't been. Because in certain parts of this society, we live in a matriarchy, and in certain parts of it, there's lots of professions, there's lots of areas. I would argue, and I got in trouble. Somebody said to me a couple of weeks ago, I was too edgy when I talked about kind of like how middle-aged women kind of dominate the media, but they do. Like, it's a matriarchy there.
There's matriarchies and those things, but it's just it's not. What we have is, and it's that I can't remember the name of the philosopher. The march towards, gone out of my head now. And people always tell me in the comments when I forget things. By the way, people were upset last week that I didn't remember that Liberty Hall. Sorry, guys, chill out. I just forgot. I had a brain freeze for a second.
Yeah, but
Sometimes,
I also, for some reason, forgot. Because for
just
some
went.
reason, when you were saying that, for some reason, I was thinking of the other end of the keys, and I
That was
didn't hear you.
no.
Hear you
I was
say trade
picturing it,
union.
but I was picturing it, and it just went out of my head. People are like, "Why does she not know?" I do. Calm down. Don't get your panties in a wad, guys. Seriously. But when you ideologically overthrow the universities, and you are now, I mean, that subject, whatever, what's the subject called? Social, whatever, it didn't even
It is
exist in our day.
called, let me check here, it is called
CSP or something?
Politics and Society.
Politics and society. It didn't even exist when we were in school, or when I was in school anyway. So you, not only have you overthrown the universities ideologically, and what's being churned out of universities is brainwashed people who think that they know everything about the world according to a certain ideological position, but you're pulling it back now into secondary school, and it's so damaging and dark to teach truth in your interpretation, in an ideological position as truth, to children. And you are still a child when you're doing your leaving cert most of the time. And then they march on into the universities. And what hope do you have as a society for anything but what we're getting out of the universities now, which is just, for the most part, inability to think for themselves, screaming and roaring at anything, thinking that everybody who disagrees with them is the devil. There is only one way. Everyone who disagrees with me is bad. Everyone who disagrees with me is Hitler. And I'm going to scream and shout and roar if I don't get agreed with. That's what we're getting.
Yeah. No. I mean, there's so much. I mean, I was talking to some people this week where I am about kind of the radicalization of the youth. And it's funny because at that age, 17, 18, as we all know now, women, the young girls, young women, maturing young adults, whatever term we want to use, are just drifting so radically to the left. Do you know that in New York this week, a woman got elected as the Democratic nominee for Congress in a very safe Democratic seat? And she ousted the Democratic Hispanic caucus leader. So this is the guy who's the leader of all Hispanic Democrats in Congress, very senior guy. And this woman came along and she ousted him. And one of her policies that appealed to Democratic voters was that she wanted to abolish prisons. Oh, fair enough. So a journalist asked her a fairly reasonable question. Well, if you abolish prisons, where do we put the murderers? And her answer, and I'm not making this up, bearing in mind now the US congressperson has far more power than any Irish TD, and like this is a serious legislator this person's being elected to. Her answer to where do you put the murderers when you abolish prisons was, and I quote, that in a democratic socialist society, I don't believe there would be any murders. So, like, this is the quality of person. Your delayed laugh was worrying me there. I was trying to...
It's just mental illness, isn't it?
Yeah, then look.
That is a level of delulu that is just, you've left the reservation, you have no concept of reality, you have sat in cafes with other people eating avocado toast and only talked to your mates for your entire adulthood. You have never had a dose of reality, you have never had a harsh word spoken to you, you are an idiot.
Yeah, look, I also met I also met some people this week who would be kind of thrusting young intellectuals on the right. And I'm not demeaning them here when I say this, kind of like the new generation, the Zoomer generation of young right wing men coming through. And like, I felt like a socialist after I finished talking to them with some of the radicalism that's coming through there. And I just fear that, like, all this chat about extremism kind of, so much of it is taking place in our generation and amongst the media and amongst the Mick Cliffords and the John McGurks and the various Keith Mills on Twitter. The generation that are coming through, who've been through this education system, have a bunch of, and obviously I'm generalizing. This is not true of every young woman. It's certainly not true of every young man. But there are large numbers of young women who are completely radicalized against society, who radicalized against men, radicalized against dating, radicalized against marriage. And lots of young men who've been so alienated by the education system they've put through that they're radicalized against women, they're radicalized against dating, they're radicalized against marriage. It is horrifying on both levels. And now you're seeing, to like the US Congress, people getting elected with like not like out there views, wackadoodle crazy views.
But that's the problem. That's the problem. That is it. So lots of people back in the day, even people who are retired now from politics, but would have spent some time in college being radical. I don't actually have an issue with people having kind of a bit wild radical ideas when they're in college, because to an extent that's what college is for, particularly if the college is allowing for radicalism on all sides of the spectrum politically.
Mhm.
My issue is that they only allow one most of the time in Irish universities at the moment. But fine. I think that college is a time for exploring, but college is a fine time to have a little bit of kind of like, delusions of righteousness and everything and you're radical and whatever. And that was always the thing, John, before, that it was like, what's the old expression, like, if you're a liberal before you're 40, you've got no, if you're not a liberal before you're 40, you've got no heart, and if you're still a liberal after you're 40, you've got no brain.
I
uh,
had no heart.
I didn't mean either. I don't know, soul. But the point is that a part of your intellectual journey, to use the cool hip phrase of the generation, is to kind of like develop your thinking, develop your ideas. You go to college, you probably hang out in college with people just like you, and then you all have drinks or whatever, and then you leave college and you get a job and you start paying tax, and then you evolve and whatever. So that's the way that goes. But what the problem for us is that people are not evolving past that, because they're going from college and the drinks with the same people into the NGO or into the newsroom, and they're not evolving past that, and they're going into Congress without ever having any of that stuff, any of that stuff, sort of the rough edges of their nonsense sort of chipped off them by life, by paying tax, by meeting different people, by having a job where your boss is mean to you. That's all gone. That's all gone. So now they just survive. All their college indoctrination is surviving in the real world, because the real world is accommodating their bullshit.
I just had a terrible realization. Are you and I now, are we the olds giving out about the young people? Is that what we are?
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. I don't, I mean, there's so many young idealistic people who I meet, particularly on the right, because I tend to attend things that are kind of like related to right wing politics, right wing media, and what have you. And there's so many young idealistic right wing people who just want like a good life for themselves. I assume that's kind of the same on the left to some extent. But what terrifies me is that where I think there's a difference, and it's not just you and me having a go at the kids coming 20 years behind us, is that when I was in college years ago, there was dialogue. Like, yes, everything you say about kind of like adopting the crazy out there positions. I mean, like, college is when you believe in a flat tax. It's when you go for like the radical libertarian solution. There should be no government except for roads and prisons, whatever. Um, but and hopefully you kind of grow out of it, or maybe you refine your views or whatever. But there was debate and there was dialogue. I mean, I remember, not just because I was in the debating societies, but also because like the political societies were there. You would talk to each other, and there'll be cross-party events, there'll be discussions of ideas, and sometimes on really heated subjects, including like the Middle East, which was heated even then. Whereas now, I mean, I think I've told the story that I was invited to the Law Society in UCD last year, and again, lovely people, but just and it wasn't that they disagreed with me that frightened me. What frightened me was the kind of glazed look in their eyes, that it was that they weren't even willing to hear an opposing argument.
Yeah.
That's what terrified me. And that was not the university I went to 20 years ago.
Yeah. And I've seen that in, obviously, like, I became a barrister later, and I've seen with young people who were doing a law degree, like, turning their chairs around to people who had different views at dinners and different things. Like, I saw it with my own eyes, and I was like, God, like, guys, grow up. Seriously.
Yeah, it's horrendous. Anyway, that might do us for another week. And unless you had anything to add, is there anything that we missed on the schedule?
No, you said I said I was going to explain a little bit about what's going
Oh,
on.
do,
Uh,
yes, yeah.
so just keep it really brief because people probably don't understand or whatever. But Jim O'Callaghan has introduced
Your
a
friend.
yeah, not so much at the
Oh,
moment. Um, and introduced a criminal legal aid reform, which, in a nutshell, so it's really hard to explain to people who aren't familiar with the criminal law um, system, but effectively, um, at the moment, supposing you are arrested for shoplifting and you appear at a district court and you go in and you apply for, your solicitor will apply for legal aid, and then there will be multiple appearances or whatever. And a lot of the time, the appearances will be unrelated to the client. They'll be related to the state not being ready with disclosure or all kinds of things. And people who are in the district court in criminal matters a lot of the time have chaotic lives, and sometimes they mistake. Anyway, Jim is introducing a flat fee model, which is basically that per client, the solicitor will get paid €400 per client, no matter how many appearances they are expected to come to court, which could be 20, and that they're only paid at the very end of the matter being finalised, which could take 2 years. So what they're asking solicitors to do from the 1st of July is to, from the 1st of July, any new client that appears, to appear as many times as it's required, and to maybe wait a year or two to get paid. No other professional service would be asked to do that. It's completely absurd. Obviously, barristers are briefed by solicitors, so it affects us. But the solicitors have withdrawn services at the moment because that's just simply not viable.
If I could maybe speak in a few things here, because I know, right, there will be people listening to this podcast, and I don't have a dog in this fight because I'm not a barrister, beyond my sympathy for my friends who are, including present company. But there will be people listening to this podcast who'll be like, he's taking money off them there, vulture lawyers, fair play to him. But I think the point is that isn't he disproportionately hitting kind of the newer, the younger lawyers? Because if you're in the district court doing criminals, I mean,
Well,
I think he's going out. He's not going after the senior counsels here, right?
well, younger lawyers traditionally, I mean, if you're referring to barristers, tend to cut their teeth, as they say, in the district court. So there's an element of that. But he's going after the solicitors. But it's not. Look, it's really simple. I know people will think that solicitors and it's this and it's that, and I see in the paper that there's obviously a lot of briefing going on about different cases where loads of legal aid was claimed or whatever. But people deserve legal representation. People who don't have any money deserve legal representation. And at the end of the day, this when the state starts to intervene in things like this, they damage people's ability to get a service. And I won't even do the solicitor thing. I'm married to a dentist. The government tinkered around with the medical card for dentistry a few years ago. And now people who are listening to this will know, well, they'll have heard anecdotally, you can't get a dentist, you can't get a dentist, you can't get a dentist. You can't get a dentist because dentists withdrew from the medical card scheme. And dentists withdrew from the medical card scheme because it was absurd. It was damaging to their business. You couldn't do the jobs you wanted. It was completely ridiculous. So dentists over time prioritized more private clients because it's a business and they have to pay staff and electricity and insurance, etc. And that's why people who are on medical card cannot find a dentist to fix their teeth, because the government messed around with that system. And it's the same with this. It'll be the same with other things. I was talking about maternity care in Ireland. It's same old, tinkering with things they don't understand. Like, have a consultation with solicitors and barristers and say, how can this system work better or whatever. But don't just ram in a reform that completely obliterates people's entire livelihoods. Say nothing for the fact of people's ability in the future to get legal representation, and act like, well, it's just that's the way it's going to be. Like, sorry.
And
Like, if people, I accept that people will, like, lawyers, oh yeah, we're all whatever. But when you're thinking about the effect this might have on people. Ask yourself when the last time you heard somebody talking about how easy it was to get a dentist, and that's what it's going to be like to get a solicitor in crime in a few years' time if this goes ahead. That's
Yeah,
it.
I'm going to take this actual opportunity to share my most left-wing opinion. Well, I think it's my most left-wing opinion. People, some critics would say I have too many, but here it is. I think everybody who is charged with a criminal offence should get automatic free legal aid. I don't think it should be means tested. I don't think it should be limited. I think it is a basic civil right that if the state is trying to take away your liberty, put you in prison because it suspects you of an offence, bear in mind that you're innocent until proven guilty, and even if you're accused, you're an innocent person until you're proven guilty, then I don't think that should cost you money. And I don't think that the state should be compelling people based on the fact that they happen to be middle class or working people to go and pay for their own lawyers while kind of like, the lad from the caravan park gets the free legal aid. I don't think that's fair. I think there should be universal free legal aid for everybody
Well, I mean, that's a
in criminal matters.
the yeah. But the other argument that's being made by the department is that private matters were going faster. But it's so disingenuous, because the thing is that supposing you're um, paying privately, it's nothing to do with the fact that you're paying privately that makes it go faster. It's to do with the fact that people who are committing crimes, who are illegally aided, are more likely to have chaotic lives, more likely to have substance abuse or other issues, more likely to maybe miss an appearance, more likely to need the services of the court by way of probation or welfare reports, all those kind of, like, it's so much more complex. You're comparing apples and tricycles. You're not comparing like with like. And the department is spinning heavily in this, all these specific cases where X, Y, and Z. And I'm not disputing that they happened. But when you start to diminish and when civil servants start to hack away at professionals, at professional services like this, you get what you've gotten in dentistry, which is you won't be able to get a dentist.
Isn't there the other thing that they could do? I mean, this is the other thing, of course, because with criminal legal aid, you still have the right to go to whatever solicitor's firm you want if they'll
Yeah.
take you on as legal aid. The other thing, of course, they could do if they wanted to save money on all of this, which they would never do because this would offend left wing sensibilities, they could just get rid of that altogether and instead set up a public defender's office like they have in most US districts where there's 14, 15 full time solicitors employed by a department whose only job is to defend people who've been accused of crimes.
Well,
That
I
would
mean,
streamline the system.
you'll put loads of solicitors out. You'll put loads of solicitors out of business. But so no, but it's an
I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying that they're trying as ever to half-ass it, right? They want to keep the solicitors that they have, but pay them a little bit less. But those solicitors firms have many other options for clients. So all it's going to mean is that the criminal defense solicitors doing criminal work at the moment will now start prioritizing their private clients over their legal aid clients because there'll be a differential in fees. Whereas if you wanted to kind of reduce costs, there's another way to do it, which is to do the public defender's office kind of
yeah.
situation, which would, but as ever with this government, it's a half-assed in between house that makes the system worse for everybody. That's
And,
that's
and
my
and
analysis.
but no thought for like the realities of the situation. There's no answer to whether, for example, if there's multiple appearances and you're waiting 2 years to be paid, what happens if the client goes missing on the 19th appearance and moves back to a country that he was from before? You just never get paid for all that work. Like, on what planet is any professional service expected to be retained on the 1st of July next Wednesday, by a client, and then told, well, you're not going to get paid a penny until this is completely finalized. And if the client decides at the last minute to actually take on another solicitor, or the client disappears, or the client has to, for a variety of reasons, has to appear in court 15 times, you're still getting paid the same, and you're still getting paid at the end.
Look, the standard invoicing for private companies, right, is 30 days, with exceptions. Maybe if you have a long-standing relationship and it's a big client, 60 days. But I don't understand why the state would ever be allowed to wait 2 years before paying somebody for work that was done on the behalf of an behest
So
of the state.
I present to a doctor with a curable disease, and I arrive at the doctor's surgery next Wednesday, and he says your treatment is going to take between 1 and 2 years, and we agree that he's going to get paid at the end when I'm better.
Yeah. Yeah, but not if you die. All right, look, we will. Although maybe that's fair. Maybe that's fair. Actually, I'm
No,
kidding.
that's not fair. And
I'm
also,
kidding.
and also, it's the same principle. What if the client dies?
Yeah. All right, look, we are over time, but I, for one, have enjoyed the conversation this week. I hope I get to the editing that the sound was okay. This is a 1 week only thing where I'm not around, at least until we go on holidays in August when Sarah and I both won't be around, and we'll try and figure out what to do. But thank you very much for having listened to us. Thank you very much to Sarah for having joined me, as she always does. Thank you all for your support thus far over the past few weeks, and we'll be back this day next week. Take care. Bye.